Hi everyone, this is William. You may or may not know me from my YouTube video series on Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich of Russia. I'm standing now in front of the place where he died. Now a hotel, it was a sanatorium, a tuberculosis sanatorium. Was and is still called Chatsop, and you don't have a very good view of it there. But I really didn't come out to film the hotel. Sorry, I'm just trying to put a glove on. It's cold out here. Anyway, I'll turn around. Ooh, that's nice. I'll turn around and you can see the view behind me. Wow, look at that big black rain cloud. It's May, I think May 16th, and it's snowing, but the weather will soon be getting better, I think. The hotel is closed at the moment for the mid-season, and it's a Saturday, so there's really no one around except myself and the cats and a few other people. And I thought I would walk to the garden, the Alpinum, and talk a little about something that I've been wanting to do a video on, though it's a huge topic, which is the brothers Karamazov. Some of you have seen some of my videos. I almost shudder to think on the Magic Mountain, Thomas Mann's Zauberberg. And I didn't really know what I was doing back then. I don't really know what I'm doing now. But it's one of my favorite books, Zauberberg. I've read it about 10 times. I'm probably better qualified to talk about the brothers Karamazov would be the correct pronunciation, I believe, because I have a PhD in Russian history, and I'm also a Greek Orthodox Christian. Not Russian Orthodox, but it's the same theology. So I've been rereading Brothers Karamazov. I've read it several times, not as many times as the Magic Mountain. And I've been watching lots of videos on YouTube about the Brothers Karamazov. Everything from academics to people who are reading it for book clubs. And I always enjoy them. They can be a little bit frustrating. So who is this video aimed at? People who are familiar with the book or are interested in reading it. So I tend to leave little things out, like the name of the author. So Fyodor Dostoevsky. And I think it's interesting to see that so many people really love the book without really knowing how to understand it. And I've only seen one video from a person who was a Russian speaker and read the book in Russian and had a sort of Russian cultural background. So most of the videos and reviews and discussions, even among academics, are more from what would have been for Dostoevsky a foreign perspective, a Western European or North American perspective. Boy, I'm a little out of breath. This is my shortcut. I'm going here past the old villa and the new chalet to get up to the garden. Otherwise I would have to go along this, well, you can't see it, this quite long path. So what was I saying? So I think if you've already read the book and plan to reread it, or if you've never read it and are going to read it for the first time, there's a couple of things that I would say. It's a book with a great value as a psychological work, but if you read it as a psychological work, be careful. Be careful is the wrong word, but be mindful that there are, if you read it as an intellectual or psychological work, both of which it is, you're kind of not going to penetrate to the inner mystery of the book, so to speak. So it is what I would call an ontological novel about the nature of being itself. And the fact of the matter is that in the setting, in the post-emancipation of the serfs, 19th century Russia, it was nobody anywhere really had a tendency to analyze things psychologically, because there was no such thing as pop psychology. So unless you were in that field, you weren't going to read a book like The Brothers Karamazov and say, oh, this character is bipolar, this character has an antisocial personality disorder. Those things didn't exist. And not only did they not exist as diagnoses, you weren't going to say, for instance, Dostoevsky wasn't going to look at the characters and say, here's how this person can achieve psychological healing. The point of the book isn't that they be on a healing trajectory where they can face up to childhood traumas, for instance, and, cease to be neurotic and become higher functioning. The point is not psychological healing, but spiritual healing. The disease, as Dostoevsky would see it, was a spiritual disease. So he wouldn't be wanting to send these characters to professors of neurology or psychiatry. He would be wanting to send them to people like Father Zosima, Elder Zosima in the novel, for spiritual healing. And so you have a character like Ivan Karamazov, who's an intellectual. He grapples deeply with ontological problems and problems of why there's evil in the world, why people suffer. The book is famous for that. But he can't, he can't offer readers a solution because there simply is no intellectual solution to that problem. Oh, let's see. The Alpinum is still closed. You can see why, because flowers are not in bloom and there's still snow. Anyway, what the book is about, I would say you have to interpret it through an understanding of two orthodox, well, you could say theological principles, or you could call them mysteries. One being theosis, and the other being kenosis, if I pronounce those correctly. So, theosis means becoming God. And, don't freak out if you're a Western Christian It's not saying, sort of in the kind of New Age way, we're all God. I'm God, you're God. Rather, it's about sort of entering a state of synergy with God, drawing closer and closer to God, coming closer and closer into communion with God. And the other one is kinesis, means emptying out. That's all it means in Greek. So emptying yourself out, not nihilistically, not entering any kind of void or nothingness, but emptying yourself out in love. The mystery of the Trinity in Orthodox theology. As I interpret it based on what I've been taught, is that each person of the Trinity empties him/herself out in love into the other, and in turn is filled with love. And so you have a dynamism there. It's not static, and human beings are called upon to do that as well. And that is, if you interpret the book with that in mind, then you will see what the solution is to these questions that Ivan raises, and that they're it's a profoundly ontological solution, not an intellectual or psychological one. And in fact, you could give this solution a name. And by that, I don't mean Father Zosima, although he certainly could, his name certainly could be the one. But I would say the single most important character in the book, as far as grasping the mystery that Dostoevsky wants to present, is a character who's rarely mentioned, by the name of Markel. And Markel is Father Zosima's older brother, who dies when Father Zosima is just a boy. Markel is dying of consumption, of tuberculosis. If he'd been a wealthy young man, he might have come here to Davos to try an alpine cure. But instead, he dies at home in Russia. And before he dies, he enters, what could be called an ecstatic state, except it's not in a negative sense of that word, where he loses his bearings. He is in a state of ecstatic love. And if you read that section of the book and look upon it as the core of the whole book, you'll find the rest of the book very enlightening indeed. One of the things that tends to annoy me is the constant focus in discussions about the brothers Karamazov on the Grand Inquisitor, Brother Ivan's prose poem. And, it's beautiful, it's important. There are a few things one should keep in mind reading it. The fact that theologically, Eastern Christianity and Western Christianity are profoundly different. It may seem on the surface that Roman Catholicism and Orthodox Christianity are actually quite close, There are some differences, like that the Roman Catholics have the Pope as the head of the church. The Orthodox don't have a Pope. And, you know, the interiors of the church look a little different, that sort of thing. Especially to a Protestant, they seem like pretty much the same liturgical faith. And the fact of the matter is, they are profoundly different theologically. So that's one of the things to keep in mind as you read the Grand Inquisitor. That Dostoevsky was a Russian chauvinist. He was Orthodox Christian who looked at the Roman Catholic Church as authoritarian, corrupt, and pretty much altogether bad. So that, yeah, and that, and also the fact that in Russia, the question of freedom, which is crucial to understanding the Grand Inquisitor, was a little bit different. And the serfs, who made up a huge percentage of the population, the peasantry made up more than 90% of the population, had recently been liberated. You'll find in the book, when you read about the servants, about Fyodor Karamazov's servants, that they were serfs. They belonged to Fyodor Karamazov. The wife always wanted to go to Moscow and open a little shop. Well, they had no choice. They had no ability to do something like that because they were property. And then after the serfs were liberated, you know, that's still her dream, but her husband doesn't want to do it. He wants to remain loyal to the master, who now pays him a little salary. Anyway, that's another thing to keep in mind when you're reading the book and the Grand Inquisitor. And there are so many little stories and parables in the book that resonate far more with me than the Grand Inquisitor does. That I would beg you to pay close attention to those and not get fixated on the Grand Inquisitor, not buy the book and then just read that single chapter. So I've talked for almost 20 minutes now. I've told you nothing about the book itself and what happens, even who the characters are. I've been talking about them as though you already know them, of course. So maybe this is the flip side of the videos that I tend not to like so much, where the person goes through the book and says, and details the activities. Here's what happens, then here's what happens, then here's what happens. And kind of seem, you know, that you miss the forest for the trees. And now I'm giving you a grand view of the forest, but not the individual trees. So that's not ideal either. But anyway, I hope that I'll be talking more about the specifics of the brothers Karamazov. And I hope for at least one or two people this video has been helpful. So let me know what you think if you feel so inclined. And if you haven't watched any of my Grand Duke Dmitri videos, I would definitely recommend those. Quite different. We're not talking about a work of literature, we're talking about a person who wrote diaries and letters. Yeah. At any rate, I hope to see you at some point in the future with one of the videos. So take care. Bye.